All right, so browser storage. How was people's experience with this particular challenge? Do people feel like they got a good handle on what browser storage is and how it works? Right. Well, let's take a look at it. It says right here, JavaScript can access the browser's storage mechanism. This is how various websites know you're logged in and why you sometimes have to clear your cookies. Who here knows what a cookie is? I know you've all at least seen the word in the context of the web, right?
Yeah, I've seen it. I just don't know exactly what it is.
Okay. So when you, for example, go to a website like Facebook or Twitter or anything like that, you always, it seems to remember that you're logged in, right? One of
Yeah.
the ways that works is because here's the thing about HTTP, and we'll get in more into this at some point. HTTP, which is the protocol by which we access websites, by definition, it doesn't really. It's what's called stateless, meaning it can't hold on to data on its own. So in order to save things like whether or not you're logged in, websites will use something called cookies. And cookies are essentially their data that's stored on your browser based on which website you go to. So there'll be a Facebook will share cookies with your browser and then react to your browser next time you visit based on the content of those cookies. And you get a lot of these cookies on your browser, it eventually starts to slow your computer down because that's just a lot of data for a browser to hold on to. And a lot of information can be stored on cookies, not just login info, but also stuff like, like preferences on appearances, images, everything like that. Browser storage is actually not exactly a cookie. It's kind of an alternative to cookies that I believe is slightly more secure than cookies are, but is kind of still relatively new. So if I look up JavaScript browser storage, or we can kind of get a look at it. So go to developer window.localStorage. So it's a read-only local storage property, which allows you to access a storage object for the document's origin. The stored data is saved across browser sessions. So local storage is similar to something called session storage, except while data stored in local storage has no expiration time, data stored in session storage gets cleared when the page session ends. So there's session storage, which is almost the same as local storage, except if you leave a page, exit a session, it clears the data, while local storage can go on between browser sessions. It's specific to the protocol of every page. So in particular, data stored by a script on a site accessed with HTTP, like http example.com, is put in a different local storage object from the same site accessed with HTTPS. So if I visit http example.com right here, it has its own local storage that can't be accessed from any other website, or with a different protocol like https example.com. And we can see here, so browser storage follows a key and value pattern, much like a dictionary does. So they have local storage.set item, my cat is Tom, and then you can get item, my cat, which will return Tom. So any questions about what local storage is or why we use it, or cookies?
Noah, could you go back to the difference between the HTTP and HTTPS?
Sure. So again, we're going to have another lecture today, actually, talking about what HTTP is and what we use it. But short answer for now is that it's a protocol that we use to access a web page. So, generally, if you go to a website, it'll have HTTP or HTTPS developer.mozilla.org. The difference between HTTP protocols and HTTPS is the S stands for secure. So there's more encoding on it when you visit an HTTPS website. So that HTTPS websites are more secure. The data you're sending through is encoded in such a way so that it makes it more difficult for outside parties to access it.
So the difference here is local storage is saved differently between HTTP and HTTPS.
Yeah, because you're using different protocols to access the pages. So example.com, like HTTP example.com and HTTPS example.com are technically the same domain, but we're accessing them with different protocols. In this case, HTTP protocol and HTTPS protocol. And local storage is tied to the protocol, not the domain.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions about cookies or local storage? Great. So let's go back to our challenge. So we're creating a website using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. The website will greet you if you have visited before. Otherwise, we'll ask you for your name and greet you with subsequent requests. So for example, Jessica visits your page and has not visited before. The website presents her a form to fill in her name. After she fills it in, the website says, "Hello, Jessica." When she subsequently visits again, the website will say, "Hello, Jessica," every time. So I'm going to clone this down. Open it up. So as we see here, we have an index.html page, and we have script.js with nothing in them yet. It mentions CSS. We don't have to worry about styling right now because we just want to focus on being on the functionality. So I'm going to quickly use my Emmet extension to get this all set up. So we don't, and then all set up. And then I'll set up a script here. src equals script.js. And to make sure it works, I'm just going to have this console.log something. So now when the page loads, if this is working correctly, I should just see a console, something in the console. So I'm going to open index.html, open up the console. There it is. So we have successfully connected our HTML document with our script.js. So if we look at release 0, we have to pseudocode. So we're going to think through the process of how we'd solve this before diving in. Maybe it looks something like this. If I have their name, render their name. If I don't have their name, ask for their name, render their name. So that's that's the general idea we want to do, but we need to do this a little bit more, just add a little more detail here, right? So we don't really need to pseudocode our HTML, but we need to pseudocode what our JavaScript is going to do. So we know we have two cases. Either we have their name or we don't have their name, right? So let's try pseudocoding this out. Let's start with if name not in local storage. So if the name is not in local storage, what do we want to do?
Request a name.
We want to request a name. And how do we request a name in this case?
we could create an input box and a button to submit.
Yeah, so we can render a form or just an input box. We don't need a full form if we don't want one. So render a form and submit button. And what should happen when somebody enters data and submits that form? When form is submitted,
We want to store that data.
yes, so store name in local storage. I want to check something real quick. So and it should update in real time to say, hello, Jessica, as soon as they submit it, right? So we store the name in local storage, and then we want to say, we want to get rid of the form. We want to replace the form with hello name. All right. Else, if name is in local storage, what do we want to do? Well, first we need to retrieve the name from local storage. So retrieve name from local storage. And then we can say render hello name. Is there anything we're missing here, or does this look like good pseudocode to get us started? Okay. So in order to make this work, we need something in the HTML, right? Something for us to latch onto in the DOM so that we can actually, start to make this work. So how about we set up a div right here, and we can give it a class, an ID, and call it content. So that way we can actually, figure out, what's in content. So let's make our function. So we could call it greet user, perhaps. All right, our first quest says if name not in local storage. So let's take a look at local storage, how local storage works. So we have the set item, so that'll help us store something in local storage. We have something called get item right there, and we can clear it. So that looks like these 4 options are the only things we have. So let's see what happens if we try to get something that doesn't exist. So I'm just going to say, actually, we can just do that in our console. I could say local storage dot get item name. Let's see what comes up. Oh, there's already something there. So let's try local storage dot clear, and then get name again. Null. Okay. So we could say something like let name equal local storage dot get item name. And we could say if, we can have one that just says if name, and just kind of set this up right here. Else, like that. So you have one that says if name, one that says else. I'm just going to put a return here for now so that we have something there. All right, so if name is not in local storage, we need to request a name by rendering a form and a submit button. Okay, so that means we need to somehow give our JavaScript put a form into ID content, right? How can we do that? Does JavaScript have a method built in that we can use to create HTML elements?
Yeah, I think it's document create element, and then whatever.
Yeah, we do document.create element. Here's the documentation. So in an HTML document, we can say create an element, create method creates the HTML element specifically by tag name, like so. So they have an example here. Here's the HTML, and we can say they have an add element thing. So they say new div equals document.create element div. They give it some content by doing new content equals document.create text node. Then they say add the text node to the newly created div by appending child. And then they have this use insert before to insert it into the HTML. So it looks like what we want to do is we can create HTML elements in JavaScript, but they don't get appended to the page itself unless we use a method like insert before or something like that, or append child. So we could say something like, all right, so let new form. Yeah, that was using it right the first time. Equals document.create element. We want to create a form. And then inside the form, it's going to need a text input and a submit button, right? So we could say let input box equal document.create element. And this would be input. And let submit button equal document.create element a button. So we've created these elements here. Right at the moment, they're not connected and they're not on the HTML page. If we want to add them, I believe there's a method called javascript.append. Parentnode.append here. Let's take a look. There's append child, but I believe there's also append, if I'm not mistaken, which allows you to insert multiple nodes. So parentnode.append method inserts a set of node objects or DOM string objects after the last child of the parent node. Differences from append child allows you to append DOM string objects. Append has no return value, and append can append several nodes and strings, whereas append child can only append one at a time. So you should be able to do something like new form.append input box and submit button. So for now, I'm just going to console.log new form and see what gets returned here. All right, I need to actually run the function. So I'm going to greet user. Down here, we have a form. Inside the form, we have an input and a button. All right, what question have you done? What questions do you have so far?
Noah, this is maybe we talked about this, but I'm curious. Why do we have to use JavaScript instead of Python for this? Like, is there like a unique relationship between JavaScript and HTML? And do other languages also have a similar relationship?
Good question. So JavaScript, I don't know. I don't want to say categorically that Python can't do this. I do know that JavaScript is kind of built more for this, for traversing the DOM and getting elements and updating HTML in real time. I've never heard of, I don't know if there are other languages that can do what JavaScript does. As far as I know, JavaScript is, if not the only one, certainly the most popular one.
Okay.
And Once we
Thanks.
start Django, you'll see we're going to be using Python to interact with and update HTML, but it doesn't do that in real time the way JavaScript does. You have to refresh a page in order for it to render like that.
Got it. Thanks.
No problem. Any other questions about creating elements and appending children to them? Right? So let's make it so that that form actually gets put onto our page. So we do have this ID called div with the ID of content. And we're going to need that no matter what happens. So up here, let's put a const, call it content equals document.getElement by ID, content. And then I want it to content.append child, new form. So now if I refresh the page, cannot read property append child of null. Okay, that's interesting. So what that tells me is that content here is being rendered as null rather than as a text element. Does anyone have an idea as to why?
Did you
Because-
set defer?
I did not. So without that defer tag here, essentially this JavaScript runs before the DOM is loaded. And so when it tries to find something with the ID of null, it doesn't know where to look. So now if I refresh the page, okay, so I've got an input and a button, kind of. So let's make it so that we can actually have a little more of a, a little more content here that actually, makes it look okay. So we could always say submit button dot inner text equals submit. And we want to have something up here that says, please enter your name, right? So we could say, I wonder if we could do the same thing with the inner text function. So new form dot inner text. I don't know if this will work, but we'll find out. Inner text also equals please enter your name. Okay, so you can't do that with a form element.
I think
But what-
text is spelled wrong. Will that matter?
You're right, it absolutely will. There we go. I'm gonna add a little space after that, just so we have it make it look a little bit better. Okay, so now we have a form. I can type in my name, hit submit. What happens when I hit submit?
Page refresh.
That form will trans.
Yeah, so the form, when in HTML, a form will always force a page refresh when it's submitted, unless you do take steps to prevent that. As well, we don't have anything actually happening when I submit the form. So in this case, we're going to need to make sure that once we've rendered it, we also need to make sure that there is a event listener attached to this form. Does anyone know what the name of the method is that allows us to add an event listener to something in our DOM? I'll give you a hint. It's just called an add event listener. So we can take a look at what W3 School says. So document.add event listener here, they can give it a click function, and then you can put a function after that. So it takes in an event as a parameter and a function, and optionally a use capture, which is not something we really need to worry about right now. So we could say before we append this to the DOM, we could say new form dot add event listener. And so we could do, so now we need to figure out what kind of event we need. We could put a click event on the button. What's the disadvantage of doing it that way, though? Because when we,
because it'll refresh as soon as you click it.
so it'll do that either way. But the difference between a click and a submit function is this. If I do put something here and hit click, that does it. We also have uh-oh. So let's comment this out for now. But if it's just a click function, if I hit enter instead of clicking, it won't register that as submitting the form. So when you're working with forms specifically, adding a submit event listener to the entire form as opposed to a on click to the button is usually safer. And then we need to write a function here, right? So I'm going to make a function. And I'm going to have it take an event as an argument here. Because the first thing I want to do is prevent this from forcing a refresh. An event has a built-in thing here called prevent default, which just prevents the default behavior of the HTML element, which in this case is I want to prevent a refresh. So if I do that, I could say, type in Noah, hit enter. Now nothing's happening because I'm preventing the default behavior. So after I prevent the default behavior, let's go back to our pseudocode. We need to store the name in local storage. We can do that. We could say local storage dot set item. We're setting name to. All right, what are we setting it to?
Would it be the input box dot value?
Yeah, we need the input box's value. So how do we get that?
Since we already named input box, couldn't we just do input box dot value?
Yeah, we can try that. Let's try it. So input box dot value. So that'll store it in local storage. And then we said we wanted to replace this with hello something. And an easy way to do that is we already have content as this. So we could say content.inner HTML, just for now, is going to equal hello. Need the $, hello, and this would be input box.value. All right, any questions on how we made this happen before we try it out? Oh. Okay, my screen just went dark for a moment there. Can you all still hear me and see me?
Yep.
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 Okay, I'm not sure exactly what happened there. Are we still recording? Yes, we are. Okay, not going to worry about it too much then. That was very strange. Anyway, so what questions do you have about adding an event listener and an anonymous function to our form? All right, let's test it out. Refresh the page. I'm going to submit my name. And as we can see, it got replaced with hello Noah. And if I refresh the page right now, it's replaced with nothing. Because at this point, we have something that says what happens if there isn't a name, but we haven't really said what to do if there is a name, which means if I go to local storage, we can see in here, we've got a key called name that's set to Noah. Any questions about how that worked?
No, do you mind if I see your HTML file one more time?
Sure thing.
Thank you.
Okay. So now we have right here, if the name is in local storage, we retrieve the name, which we already did, and then we just render hello Noah. So if I do content.innerHTML equals, we could just do the same line that we did here, right? Except instead of input box.value, we can say in content.innerHTML equals hello name. So now it renders my name. Not very prettily, but it's there. All right, so I think we can definitely clean this up a bit, because right now it's a very large function, and it's not as dry as I would like it to be. But does anyone have any questions about this challenge so far? Okay, so let's think about how we can clean this up a bit. Because right now we have a relatively large function. What are some things we could do to make this a little more clean and a little more user-friendly, or developer-friendly, I should say?
Maybe you could some of the create elements and whatnot, you could go and abstract it to its own function, like create form or something like that, so then it just says else create.
Yeah, for sure. So we can make a function here called create form. And then we can just grab all of this. And then at the end of it, we can return the new form instead. So now down here, we could just say new form equals create form. Like so. And to make sure this still works, I'm going to clear out local storage and then refresh the page. All right, it's still rendering. And if I submit my name again, let's see what happens. Uh-oh. Now input box isn't defined anymore, because the add event listener is now separated from create form here. So we need another way for this event listener to get to the value of our input, of our text input. And one thing we can actually do for that is by using something called, but we can actually look at the event itself and see what information it gives us. So if I console.log the event, I get submit event. It's got something like is trusted true, submitter is a button, target is the form, and the form has an input and a button. So essentially by using event.target, we can say, all right, instead of referencing a specific thing by name, we can say, all right, do something with this specific item that's causing this event to happen. So if I say console.log event.target instead, console.log's the form. And from the form, we should be able to get to the input, right? Because we're going from parent to child. Any ideas on how we might want to get from our parent form to our child input?
Would it be kind of like OOP
Kind of like OOP? In what way?
with the dot notation?
Yes, we could be able to do something like, let's take a look at a method that I know of. So JavaScript, I believe it's called firstChild. So it turns the first child node of the specified node as a node object. So if I go event.target.firstChild, like so, submit. Uh-oh. So it's not the first child because we have this text node here. So I wonder if there's another way to get that as opposed to just that. There's something called first element child. I wonder what that does. Difference between this property and first child is that first child returns the first child node as an element node, a text node, or a comment node. While first element child returns the first child node as an element node. Ignores text and comment nodes. Okay, that looks like it might work. So instead of first child, first element child. So we're ignoring the text here and just getting the input box. So we should be able to say, in this case, let input box equal event.target.firstElementChild. All right, what questions do you have about what we just did, getting from event to the input value? So what we just did is sometimes called DOM traversal. And it's extremely important skill when you're working with front-end development, because often you may not be able to always, like, not everything is going to have an easy ID or a class name that you can grab it from the DOM like that. Sometimes you're working with a text, like, with a form is a very common use case. And that form may have multiple inputs. It may have multiple things that you would need to get the value of all of them from. And sometimes you want to add the same event listener to multiple things, in which case they can't all have their own unique, you can't give them all a unique ID necessarily. But by using event instead of a specific variable name, it allows you to get from whatever's being submitted or clicked on or what have you to a specific element that you can interact with. So now if I try this one more time, it works as intended. And I refresh the page, it's still there. Great. What questions do you have about this challenge, whether it's about local storage or DOM traversal or rendering things reactively in JavaScript?
Hey, Noah, it's Jarrell.
Hey, Jarrell.
So I was following along with you and kind of just writing it down, but I just wanted to know what part of this again restarted or took over the original submit form that we had. Like, where did it get erased and then replaced?
So when we replaced the form with the greeting, you mean?
Yes, so it's just content.inner HTML, and that will automatically.
Yes. So inner HTML and inner text, which we used earlier, are very similar functions. The difference is inner HTML essentially looks at this node right here and says, we're going to replace whatever's in between these two tags with whatever you put here. So essentially, before that, there was the form and the input and the button. I just said replace all of that with this text. Get rid of all the text nodes, rid of all the nodes, get rid of everything. Inner text, on the other hand, only changes the text on the inside and not all of the rest of the HTML elements. So it's essentially saying, okay, thanks to JavaScript, we have a form here. And then once inner HTML runs, I say replace all of this with hello name. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think I'm gonna try it again on my side. I like this, going over this particular problem, because while I was doing the LinkedIn one, I was trying to basically, I created a pop-up, and then in a pop-up to be able to edit your about me. But the problem I ran into was, and I think you kind of answered it here, was every time that it would go to replace what was inside of the paragraph tags, or P tags, it would show like HTML, like a flash HTML, and then go back to what I already had in the P tags.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I have to do the thing that you did where you made it so it didn't, the prevent default one.
Yes.
Yeah. And
Event.prevent default is extremely useful. You essentially want to, there are certain things that there probably isn't a default behavior, but adding an event.prevent default isn't going to hurt anything. So that prevents unexpected side effects.
Thank you.
No problem. What other questions do y'all have?
On the index.html document, why did we do defer instead of async defer?
Sure. Yeah, good question. So defer and async are they're separate tags. I can add the async here, and that'll keep things working. And the reason the async tag exists is, and this is something we're getting into with today's lecture, some JavaScript code runs what's called asynchronously. So this right here is synchronous JavaScript. It's running the way you expect JavaScript to, from top to bottom. And sometimes we'll want to do things asynchronously, particularly when we're working with outside APIs and outside data. And that async there essentially allows the JavaScript script to utilize that asynchronous data without interrupting anything else. Okay. So essentially for this particular challenge, we don't actually need the async tag, but for today's lecture and today's challenges, you will need the async tag. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So let's take a 14-minute break. So be back here at 10:25, and we will get into HTTP.